Become a general of mighty armies at the Kings of War Hub. Take command of elves, dwarves and orcs in this game of massed fantasy combat on beastofwar.com. Take control of armies from the 5 kingdoms of Araucania and vie for the throne of the ancient king in Wrath of Kings. Master your skills on the battlefield over on beastofwar.com.
Hello everybody, I have been joined by Rich from Too Fat Lardies, and today, as I'm sure you can probably guess if you look behind us, we're talking about sharp practice. So, Rich, for anyone who has never looked at sharp practice before, doesn't know what it is, well, can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, I can. I certainly can. It's a set of rules for large skirmishes in the Black Powder era. So really we're talking about anything from around 1750, so that's 7 Years' War.
Okay, Napoleonics?
Right the way through Napoleonics, which is right slap bang in the middle of the period, right the way through to the end of the American Civil War.
Ah, I see.
So we've got some really exciting actions in there, which you've got things like the Indian Mutiny, which are in there. You've got the French-Indian War, which is in there. So really covering that whole period where the primary weapon is the man carrying a musket or a rifle firing a single shot.
Right. And whenever you say that, you mean basically a muzzle-loaded weapon?
Muzzle-loaded weapon primarily, although in the American Civil War we do start getting into breech-loading weapons, but that's kind of the real early days of that technology, where there's a lot of black powder on the battlefield, really, where there's a lot of smoke and a lot of noise, and yeah, that's what it's covering. What we wanted to do was to create a set of skirmish rules which catered for the type of action that you see on the television, on the films, when they're dramatizing something, maybe where you've got 30, 40, 50 guys. The old days of skirmish rules used to be really detailed, where you very much had maybe 5, 6, 10, 12 figures, and you were going into a great degree of detail where somebody's unbuttoning his pouch for one action and then he's taking a ball out and loading it, and really micro analysis of what's going on. We really didn't want to do that. We wanted to have a feel of something which was going to be a lot more televisual and dramatic. So the characters are really your leaders. So people like Flashman, or people like Bolito in the naval stories, or Richard Sharp, Sergeant Harper, the guys that we all see on television. And the men are really kind of the extras who are on that television set, and they're kind of not so important. So we can focus, we have enough detail to be able to see what those heroic leaders are doing. And the guys there are the cast of thousands, but in this case cast of a few dozen, who are there in the background to do their bidding and behave heroically, hopefully, or maybe run away not so heroically.
All right, so from what I'm getting, whenever I hear the words Napoleonic, I get a little shiver down my spine. Right. As soon as I hear Napoleonic, I'm thinking massed ranks, 20-foot by 12-foot tables. Yeah. Am I wrong here?
Well, you're kind of right there until we came along and filled a bit of a gap with sharp practice, because there are loads of periods out there that I've looked at. Maybe you pick up an Ostre book, or maybe you watch a film and you think, hey, I really fancy doing that period. But then you look at Napoleonics and you think, it's going to take me 20 years to paint all those figures. So yeah, sure, you're right. That's certainly the impression a lot of people get, and a lot of Napoleonic games kind of need hundreds and hundreds of figures. And there are a lot of periods like that, and you think, I really fancy doing that period. 7 Years' War is another one, where you have huge armies, and you think, I'd love to do that period, but I really don't want to invest all that time and effort, and then maybe I won't like it.
For the huge table.
Huge table, yeah, indeed. So I was really keen to create something where you could scratch that itch by doing a period which wouldn't take you a tremendous amount of investment in time and effort. So maybe 40 figures is enough to start you off on a Napoleonic game where you just have a skirmish. Maybe it's a little column of guys escorting the wagon train of gold through to the Spanish guerrillas in the hills. And maybe you've got, let's say, 20, 30 French infantry chasing you, and you've got maybe 8 16 French cavalry joining them, and you can have a really exciting game with that captures all the flavour, and you've got all the beauty of those Napoleonic uniforms without having to say, I'm going to invest in 5 years of my life painting these huge armies, because, you know, frankly, life's too short.
Well, this is the thing. It's something I'm seeing with a lot of games these days. They're designing themselves to be very self-contained, so that they don't just spiral out of control. But here's a question then. Say I want it to take sharp practice, and I want it to go big scale.
Yeah.
Could I use it for it?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. Thankfully, good to be an honest man.
Yeah, absolutely. I reckon you can double the size of the force that I've just been talking about. You could, let's say, have 100 figures aside. But beyond that, well, it's probably not the... It's a bit like using a hammer to paint the walls, you know, when you really need a brush. So this is a type of set of rules where you can get there and you can have 100, maybe 120 figures per side. But that's going to give you a big game. That's going to give you a big game. And it will look beautiful. But any bigger than that, and you probably want to be looking for another set of rules.
Right. So what, would you maybe go 2v2 whenever you go to that size?
No, I'd, yeah, well, certainly, yeah. I mean, I see what you mean, 2 players on each side.
Yeah, one
definitely.
controlling a small column, the other controlling a small column.
Well,
Could
even
make
with
for an interesting game.
Even with the typical force that we've got, there's no reason why you can't have 2 people playing on the same side anyway.
Right.
You know, I could be running some fusiliers, you could be running some musketeers, or I could be running the infantry, you could be running the cavalry, and maybe an artillery piece. And you know, it's always interesting because, you know, we might have a plan, but you might not necessarily decide, you know, that's the best plan, and you might want to go off and do something yourself. So I always think that adds a little bit of interest, having two guys playing on the or 2 girls playing on the same side.
Well, it gives you that little bit of a sense of realism, because if you're bogged down fighting, begging for help, but your mate is also bogged down in the fighting, can they really risk taking even, say, a unit of skirmishers to go and reinforce you to hopefully clear things up?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think with any game, it's a bit like chess, really. You know, it's designed to be played you against me, and if we get to a point where, you know, we have 8 people on my side, each controlling 2 pawns or whatever, it kind of breaks down. But yeah, I mean, it's the great thing about war games is you can add a bit of storyline where maybe we've got slightly different objectives. And that's all part of the fun, isn't it?
All right, so the next question I have, so we have a beautiful, broad sort of spectrum of time that we can drop in on, right?
Yeah.
So let's pick out the key eras. So you've definitely got your Napoleonics.
Yeah.
You've got American War of Independence.
Yeah, well...
Anything in between there?
Yeah, well, we've got, in the key rules, in the core rules, in the back of the rules, you've got different army lists for different periods. So we've got French-Indian War in there. So we've got French-Indian War, then we go on to the American War of Independence, so George Washington, 1776 and all that. Then we've got Napoleonics, and we really, with the Napoleonics, in the main rules, we focus on the Peninsula, which is really the time of Richard Sharp. So you've got the French, and you've got the British, you've got the Portuguese, you've got the Spanish in there, and you can mix those forces up, which is quite fun. So I could have my British force with some Spanish guerrillas, which is a really nice kind of funky mix. Or you can bring in some Portuguese riflemen in their brown uniforms. You know, so it's the nice thing about. The nice thing about it is you can maybe have a core force, but just bring in a couple of different support options, which is the way the rules are set out. You know, you've got a number of core forces, but you've also got your support list to choose from. And just changing the support slightly makes for a totally different army. Anyway, so then we go on to Indian Mutiny, and we've got the American Civil War.
All right, well, let's focus on 3, because what I want to ask is, for those 3, now, we know we have the rules, we know we can get the miniatures, but... The one important thing that we haven't talked about yet is building tables for these time periods, because the time periods, I think the architecture and the game you actually play out, if you have a table that actually really feels like the time period, helps the game along a lot. Yeah, so totally pick one of the 3. Okay, well, let's go with Peninsula War, because that's kind of, everybody thinks of that. Everybody thinks Sharp practice is about Richard Sharp. It's kind of, it isn't, but it kind of also, we'd very definitely cover that period. All right, so what type of tables would we like to build? Okay, well, the great thing about that period actually is that you can go with that Southern European style of architecture. So actually we could use relatively the same buildings for that as we could use maybe for Mexico, or that we could use for Italy, or even the south of France. So going with that kind of Southern European style of architecture,
you can have stuff that you could equally use, in other theatres as well. But I think with any skirmish game, it's nice to have not just buildings, because we all, we get our trees for our woods and we get our buildings. But with a skirmish game, it's nice to have things like the backyards. It's nice to have a pile of barrels here for the guys to hide behind, a few carts, run out a few chickens, have a little orchard, maybe with a wall around it. So I think the important thing with a skirmish game is getting detail, because while we're looking at individual men, it's also nice to have a table which creates an environment which allows you to suspend your disbelief, really. You're trying to create something, and it's one of those things that lifts the game up from being ordinary to looking really special. But the funny thing is, it's not difficult to make those things. You can make a fence out of, if you want to go out and get some coffee stirrers and just cut them up, or you can just buy that type of thing on the market. But it's one of the things I like when I'm going around shows and conventions is looking out for some of the little bits and pieces that you can get. So maybe, oh look, there's a little jetty, I could use that, or a little resin boat, or a pile of barrels, pile of boxes, and you can bring them in alongside those buildings and really get something that, I guess it's a bit like a theatrical set. So we're talking about the fact that the rules very much are that sort of dramatic, televisual, cinematic type thing. Well, think of the table as a film set, and dress that up in a way that's going to make it, more attractive. Doesn't take a lot to make a little bit of difference.
Okay, so that's Peninsula War, Sharpe's era. We're looking at nice southern French architecture for the buildings. We're looking at nice little orchards. The actual mat itself, are we looking for base green mats, or would you maybe throw a little bit of sandy, rocky type?
Yeah, a bit of sandy, rocky type. I mean, I for my sharp practice games, what I did was, and it's a bit of a cheat really, we got some of the Citadel battle boards, and I covered up the skulls with a bit of sand.
Of course.
And I painted the whole thing in a sand colour. And I actually did that originally for using sharp practice for rules with a British naval landing party attacking slaver forts on the east coast of Africa. So we built this fort out of polystyrene and just put a bit of polyfiller on, a bit of plaster on to get it looking attractive. And then, having used the table for that, I thought, okay, I want to get a second use out of this table. So I painted it up with some PVA and scattered some grass on, and all of a sudden you've got a southern European looking board, and so you kind of double your money's worth out of a bit of terrain. So something's gone from being a desert to being sort of semi-desert, arid in southern Europe. But you can just use, really, before we had that, you can just use a sheet and dye it a sort of tan colour, and just sprinkle a little bit of grass on, a little bit of flock on the table, and that gives you the look you want without investing a huge amount of money or time.
And I suppose if you're doing that and you're wanting to do hills and stuff, you can pop those in beneath the sheet and it'll actually lift it up for nice gentle hills.
Yeah, that's right. Or these days you can get battle mats. If you want to put a few quid at it, you can get battle mats which you can just roll out on your table, and you've got something that looks fantastic.
Well, I am a huge fan of the battle mats. All right, so that's Peninsula War. Next era.
Okay, well, let's do American Civil War.
Okay, it's the one that a lot of people, I think, would love to actually play.
Yeah, it's certainly one of my favourites. And the great thing about it is, actually, if you're painting the figures, certainly for the Union side, those uniforms are a lot easier to paint because they are at least in a fairly plain uniform. So you've got, if you want to paint both, you've got the blue and the grey. It makes it fairly simple to get started with those guys and get them painted up. So it's for somebody who's kind of maybe not painted up 40 or 50 figures before, it's a really good starting point, because you can paint those Union guys, dark blue jacket, light blue trousers, and they're kind of half done at that point in time. Obviously there you're going to have a more green table, but probably a lot more woods, because America is a huge country which has lots of little built-up areas surrounded by land that's almost wilderness, and especially if you go back 150 years ago. So, and you've got that typical look of things like those rail fencing that they have, which you could make out of, if you wanted to make them, you can make them out of skewers for kebab skewers and things like that.
skewers.
Barbecue skewers. In fact, that's what mine are made out of. Barbecue skewers, which I've just crossed over and built them up and put them on a base.
I assume there's a little bit of research whenever you're home scratch building stuff. Just actually look for stuff from the period.
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, what you do is just do a search on Google and say ACW fences, and you'll find loads of photographs of what they are. And actually, that type of fences is still very much prevalent in the United States today in rural areas. So you can get an idea from those old photos.
And buildings-wise, I assume it'll be a little more sparse. So you'll maybe have like wooden manor house with a barn.
Yeah, that type of
like
thing.
that?
Yeah. And those things are pretty readily available out there. I mean, the great thing, actually, MDF buildings look fantastic when they're representing wooden buildings. And so you put them together, and you don't even really need to do much of a paint job, just a very, very light watery wash to add the texture and colour to them. And they look fantastic.
Awesome. All right, so the America's very easy sort of table build.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
All right, last one.
Okay, well, Indian Mutiny.
Okay.
One of my favourites. Really, really exciting, colourful period.
Okay. What part of the world are we in?
Well, we're in India. And they're mutinying. But, I mean, the great thing about that, actually, is you can use that same sort of sparse table that you've used in the Peninsula, because it's dry with patchy, sparse areas of grass. Or if you were going to do, let's say, the 7 Years' War, you could use the same green mat that you used for the American Civil War. So a lot of these things have got multiple uses. You can cross over and use them for different periods.
And for this one, would you build maybe any kinds of fortifications or anything?
Yeah, well, you can do, but adobe buildings are really simple. Which then again you could even use in a Wild West setting, especially if you had sort of Mexican forces or something like that. You could go along and do that, because one of the things we do is we produce a lot of additional lists, which are free to download, or in the e-magazines that we produce. For example, in the latest summer special that we've just produced, we had lists for Maximilian in Mexico, where they had the Austrian Archduke made Emperor of Mexico. Kind of wacky thing to do. But the type of buildings that they have in Mexico, flat roof, adobe buildings, would be perfect for the Indian Mutiny. So there's a lot of crossover there. And if you've got some chickens, they'll do equally well in Mexico or Spain or wherever. So
I think I'm going to have to get you chatting to one of our members, Jerry.
Yeah.
Because recently on a Weekender he was talking about, he actually found he had a familial relation who actually fought in the Indian War.
Oh, wow. Right.
And he was actually quite famous. And basically he was leading charges out to spike artillery pieces.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know him?
No, I don't, but that's the perfect action to fight with sharp practice, because what you were saying about fortifications, you had a lot of situations where you would have a small British garrison with some loyal Indian troops who were maybe in this little group of buildings, but they would then build breastworks up. You could build the breastworks up, and then the action would be to sortie out and to spike those guns which had been shelling them. That's the perfect action for sharp practice.
Yeah, well, apparently this guy did it 4 times.
Wow.
Died on the 4th try.
Right.
And unfortunately, because he didn't survive, I think if he had survived, he would have got a VC,
right.
Victoria Cross.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so doing something like that with sharp practice, I think Jerry might go for that.
Yeah,
I think Jerry might go for that.
It's the perfect action when you've got a family. He can see whether he can live up to the exploits of his ancestor.
Jerry, if you're watching this, man, comments below it. All right, so the next question for this, if this is getting me excited to play it. So here's the question: the next thing you have to think about is where is the best jump-off point for this? Now, obviously, you're going to want to pick up the rules.
Yeah.
And you're going to have essentially a core force. We've talked about sort of the model count that you would have.
Yeah.
But for actually jumping into it, is having a scenario in mind before you jump into sharp practice a good idea?
Well, it can't hurt, can it? For example, if you're going to do spike the guns, you know you've got to buy a gun. Yeah. But yeah, it's not a bad starting point. The great thing that makes it easy is the rules do have core forces. So for every force, so let's say it's British in the Peninsula, you're going to have 3 choices of forces. So that gives you a starting point. And what you've then got is you've got big list of support options that you can choose from. So they can be the generic support options. So do you want to have an extra leader, or do you want to take with you an ammunition cart? So if you guys run short of ammunition, so you can kind of look that up. You take your core force, let's say that's 50 points, and you and your pal are going to say, right, let's build up a 70-point force.
Yeah.
So my core force might be 50 points, yours might be 55, so I can choose another 20 points, and you can choose another 15, and then we know we've got a kind of balanced force, and it gives us a good starting point.
Yeah, and that's going to start adding in some flavour to the force.
It is, but the lovely thing is that once you've got your core force ready and your 70 points, you can say, okay, well, I fancy doing something a bit different, next time we play. So I'm just going to buy a gun and 5 guys to crew it, and maybe an officer to look after it. And then just taking one of the other support options out and then bringing that in gives you kind of a completely different type of force to play with. The thing I tend to do is that you would often tend to find that a core force is going to be about 40 figures. So that's 5 groups of 8 guys typically. So, but what I'll always do is I'll paint them up in 3 groups at a time. So I might paint 3 groups of fusiliers and 3 groups of, let's say, grenadiers. So I could either choose to have a force which is 3 groups of grenadiers and 2 groups of fusiliers, or I could have 3 groups of fusiliers and 2 groups of grenadiers, which is kind of
even within the core force. There's a little
that's
bit
right. You can have a bit of variety and a bit of variation.
Okay.
So I call it the rule of 3s with sharp practice. If you paint up 3 groups of anything, you can always mix and match later on. But it's one of those things that it's nice to add to. And you might think, I just want to paint a little group of skirmishers. Well, it's 6 figures. You can aspire to do that before the game next week, and then all of a sudden, kind of totally different force, different match, and you kind of find yourself buying more than you thought you were originally going to. But hey, that's wargaming. Yeah, exactly.
And then, at the time of filming, Gen Con is just around the corner, so I know my bank account. It's sitting there going, no, it's going to happen. All right, so final question. Sharp Practice is a game that's been out for a little while. And from the sound of it, you guys are adding stuff and e-magazines and stuff. I'm just wondering, what are you guys planning to do with it in the future? Because if it's a game that's constantly moving on and growing, I would like to hear, maybe get a sneak peek for everybody of what's coming in the future for them.
Yeah, okay. Well, one of the things that's really important is the supplement we have for campaigns called Dawns and Departures. And that really enhances the game because it allows you to develop a campaign by just rolling some dice. You can literally sit down and take 10 minutes, and that will draw your map for you. Just roll the dice, see what's happening, and then it will give you your scenario. And then it will give you everything you need to start playing, and that's kind of a little 2-player thing. I can play against you, and the good thing about it is that gives you a campaign that's probably going to play for maybe 3 games, 4 games. So it's not something that's going to last forever. But we like to think of it as each campaign is like a chapter in a book. So we've got our heroes who are leading our forces, and the first campaign, 3 or 4 games, that's the first chapter. We can actually put that to one side and then go and play something else for a month, and then think, hey, let's do the next chapter in the book now, and get back into that.
I like that.
It's good fun. And
it's something I've seen recently is campaign burnout is definitely a thing. Definitely something to be careful of.
Big thing.
So hearing that you're going to play 3 or 4 games in a campaign, just you and a mate, instead of having to rely on maybe 5, 10, 15 people to be coming down playing consistent games the whole time, definitely good.
Yeah, it's a great one, isn't it? Because we've all seen people set up huge campaigns which everybody gets really enthusiastic about, and then all it takes is one person not to submit their instructions or turn up for a game, and everybody's hanging around waiting, and then kind of that enthusiasm disappears.
I've seen that even happen with more modest-sized campaigns as well. So it is one of those things, but if it's just you and a mate, you can pick it up whenever. Yeah,
you can. That's right. You can play that first game and then go, okay. And the great thing is that writing orders for the next turn, or giving your orders for the next turn, is designed that you can do it in 1 or 2 minutes at top. So you're not there poring over this map trying to make big decisions.
And is there much housekeeping with it?
No. The whole design plan means that you can play it out with a maximum of 1 sheet of A4 to keep all your notes on for the whole campaign.
Lovely.
It's just kind of easy. So if you've got, for example, if you start the campaign with with 20 bags of supplies, that's enough for 20 turns. It's that simple. So
Right.
you start with 20 bags, and you don't even have to keep a note of it, because you know that 5 turns in, hey,
I've
you've
used
got
that 5
15.
bags.
Yeah, that's right. Now you might win a few bags, and then at that point, you know, if you beat me, I might leave 3 of my bags behind because I'm running away in terror.
Yeah.
So you just add 3 to your total, and I take 3 off mine. So that's where you just scribble this down on a sheet.
So
of
it's like a sort of
paper.
war chest to keep track of, are your forces up to scratch, are they getting fed well enough?
Well, and if you're running out of supplies, you can go foraging and things like that. But it's really easy to manage. The design objective was, if you're gonna have to keep notes, the whole campaign has got to be covered on one sheet of A4. And today, I've never used more than a couple of lines on that, because it's you've got to keep it easy, otherwise it just becomes like a trip hazard, and you trip up and the whole thing comes to a grinding halt. But the great thing about a campaign is you've got lots of decisions to make. You know, like you've suffered a few casualties, well, and you've got a few guys who are coming back from being wounded because you've got a doctor with you and he's treated him. So which groups do you reinforce and which do you let go? So there's decisions to be made all the way along. You've got to try and keep your force in fighting fit order. So good fun.
Yeah.
And then we're still going to be running out additional army lists. I'm really keen to develop it further forward, so we're looking at doing a supplement for warfare in the colonial periods. So that's going to bring in things like the Zulu Wars, which is going to take the time period on slightly, and Cape Wars in Southern Africa, which there's some beautiful figures out there by the Perry Miniatures. So I'm looking at developing the rules forward into that area. I'd really like to do some of the wars in China, just because they're so pretty. And that's what I was saying earlier about, it scratches that itch. You think, hey, I'd really like to do that period. And the great thing is, you only need to paint 40 figures and you're in.
All right, well, here's a question for you. So you're moving forward in time. Would you ever consider going backwards?
Well, yeah. I mean, some people have already written supplements for using it for the War of the Roses, even, which is kind of something I would never have thought of. But English Civil War is something we've seen people covering. So there's kind of lots of options there to take it backwards as well. But yeah, it's there's an awful lot of stuff on our forum which fans of the rules produce, and they put out there for people to use. So lots of different options that you can take it and develop it in different areas, and that's part of the fun.
Very cool. Well, Richard, thank you for coming in, man. It's
my pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Great to see you. Yeah.
Everybody, I tell you what. Get your comments in below. What era do you think you would drop into sharp practice with? Because there's such a nice breadth of gameplay you could have there. Do you like the idea of being able to dip into historical with a light amount of figures, or do you really want to just go for the 20-foot by 12-foot table and just go nutty with it? We'll move on here. Get your comments in. We'll see you in the next one.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now, and be sure to check out beastsofwar.com for the latest gaming news and gaming let's plays. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.